Hi, in this video I want to take you through using Mixer. This is a tool by Quixel and I'm going to show you this at a very beginner type level. Now you can download Mixer from the Quixel site. When you download it, it may take a while to install first time round because it installs quite a lot of base textures. Quite a big library of various surfaces like grass, mud, rock, stone, and a whole range of different options that you have ready. So what you want to do when you see this panel after you open it up is you want to create a new mix. Now you maybe want to get an Epic Games account if you want full access to even more of the library, especially if you're learning and you want to just get that bit more, but there's already a lot of start material there that's free to use, enough to get you an idea of how everything works. So I'm going to go for a new mix here and it's going to call it My Mix, and working resolution 2048 is pretty ideal. If you do have an oldish computer, you can drop this down and later you can up-res. For example, if I change this to 1024, it means it doesn't have to render as many pixels while you work, but you can export at higher resolution because a lot of these textures, they're procedural and it can call in what texture sizes it needs when you're exporting the final texture. I'm just going to leave this at 2048 because I know on my machine it works just fine. Okay, so this is the editor. You'll see to the right there's model settings. It's a plane that is 2 by 2 meters, so it's kind of set up in real world scale. So you can imagine your feet would be round about here, and standing you would be about maybe about this height. Okay, so it's a bit of ground that just sits in front of you. Just now it's just a plain grey because if we click on this layers tab here, we can see that the base layer is grey. Now there's a whole lot of things in this base layer. The albedo is the colour, so you can click here and you can actually change this. Metalness is how metallic it is. Now metalness tends to be white to say it's metallic, or black as to say it's not metallic, such as plastic, cloth, and a whole range of other things. So I'm going to change that to white, and what you'll see is that the metalness has become very high. This white value basically means it's fully metallic, and it has a slightly different reflect color. It tends to reflect most of the color that's inside the albedo. It's like it's tinted almost like a Christmas bauble or like tinted tinfoil. One way to see that is to lower the roughness. Now roughness is the opposite of smoothness. So roughness being white here means it's very rough, and if I change this to black, it means it's not very rough and it reflects a bit more. You can see it reflecting some kind of image. Now that image that you see it reflect is actually this indoors image. There's also Pisa. I'm going to put the roughness all the way down. So I'm going to click on that and put it all the way down, and that will give us an actual reflection. So you see it reflects this HDRI map. A HDRI map is a mix of photographs that makes up a full 360 wrapped environment, and it's got extra lighting information in there as well, and these are the presets that Quixel Mixer gives you. So as I was saying, you can see this red tint, and that's coming from the albedo because the metallic level is high. As I drop the metallic, that red tends to be a bit different. So as you can see, I can get quite a range of material things happening. Now, if there's a texture loaded into these, you can get even more variation. Okay, so over to the local library. These are where some of the assets that you have access to will be. And I'm just going to choose any one of these. This is the damage wall plaster, and it loads that whole material and all its settings into here. Now, as you can see, some of the base layer is getting through. Right, and that's because this layer of material, it says from below, and it's coming from the bottom and making its way through based on its own height. Right, there'll be height information, some high points and some low points. Those low points don't quite make it past the level of this base layer. But what you can do is you can increase the threshold to push it past that, or make it lower so it doesn't quite reach it. And you kind of get an interesting sort of painted floor effect. You can change this from above, and it's a similar thing, whereas the height is detected from a different starting point. So as I change the threshold, it's kind of different. Or it can be opacity masked, which means it just kind of mixes based on the threshold. Okay, there's a few other options here. Now I'm just going to go for from above. Change the threshold until we see a bit of the base, and we can play around with the radius. This is like a soft fall off of the edges. If you want to see the height information of this, you can drop this down and have a look at displacement, also height, and you can see there's some darker pits and some lighter pits that push the geometry up and down. This icon here actually creates the displacement. If you turn this off, it just is a flattish surface, but it still has height information in there. Displacement is more of a feature that subdivides the mesh through the GPU and makes it look like it's got more resolution, more mesh, more geometry. I can actually go in here into displacement and change the strength of that, and now you can really see what it's doing. You do want to be quite subtle with that though. Okay, so we've got this red base and this damage wall plaster. I can always change the color of the red base to whatever I want for different effects. Maybe there's some dark blue paint in here. There's also wrap to underlying, which is kind of going to use the bump information from what is below it, and that is essentially just going to flatten this layer out because the layer below is completely flat. There's a few other options here that you'll see could be useful later on. Also, in this layer with the damaged wall plaster or whatever material you've loaded in here, you can go to the height frequency and you can increase the low frequency or high frequency details to get even more interesting effects. It's more a case of playing with the values and observing what you're getting and if it's a desired result or not. Make sure to check it at a flat angle as well as from above. Maybe check it without displacement and check it with tiling on, just to see how it's going to look if it's tiled over a certain area. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add another. Let's have a look at rock. Let's choose this one. I'm going to switch on displacement for this and turn off the preview tiling. I'm going to change this to from above and play around with the threshold. Now I can see what's happening. Wrapped underlying might not do what you want, but if we do from below and play with the threshold, we can get a different effect. If you don't like the tint of this layer, maybe it's too bright, you can easily go into the albedo and change the color so that it matches things a little bit better. I'm also going to change the base layer, and I can easily pick a tone inside the screen as well. Overall, that's looking quite nice. Let's play with the threshold a bit so that we do get a true mix. That's kind of made this a unique texture already, mixing these three layers together. Let's check out the preview tiling, check it without displacement, and that's good. It doesn't have too much of an effect because we're not going to use displacement in the end. We'd just be using normal maps. This is how the normal map looks. These deviations in the blue color help to coordinate the lighting system to make it look like it's got bumps. If you hold down Shift and right mouse button, you can move the light around. This is looking quite nice. If you do want some puddles in places, you can easily click this Add Liquid layer. Let's change the threshold a little. I'm going to turn off the tiling again. And you can change a few details about this as well. It's a good idea to play around with the values just to see what you actually get with it set low and what you get with it set a little bit higher. These are very shallow puddles. The puddles are just a very reflective type surface, but it really helps to sell this surface as wet. You can always change the lighting to different ones to see how it would look if it was in a different environment. Okay, I'm going to do some tiling. So this will be an effect, a masking effect. Sometimes you need to make the application full screen to see these extra buttons down here. So let's have a look at the local library and let's go for marble. I'm going to go for this white-ish looking marble here. Increase the threshold a bit. And now I'm going to click this to add a mask stack. This mask stack will work with this material to say whether you see it or not. A mask is basically black and white. Where it's white, it allows this layer to be seen or utilize its properties, and if it's black, it won't, and it will let the other layers through. So over here you can add a component. I'm going to go for a square pattern. Now, as you can see, I've automatically got a tiled floor. like something you maybe see in a horror game lobby, for example, Resident Evil or something like that. You see with the displacement, it would actually push the mesh out. But we're not too bothered about that. You can change things like jitter, brightness jitter, so you get slightly different tones. Gradient jitter, so you get different slope tones. It's a good idea to be a little bit subtle with these. It's too easy to make it too much. But nothing, a lot, and then just enough. That's the idea. You can also slightly change the size. Bevel. I'm going to keep this very low. And cut out if you wanted any to be missing. So back to the material itself, you can play with the frequencies, low frequency and high frequency. You can see there's a slight change. Now you'll really see this if you put the displacement on. I'm going to go back to the mask and I can change the spacing so that it's a lot smaller. That's a bit more like it. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to add another material. Maybe there's some stones. We've got some mossy rock here, why not? So this time, instead of coming from below and pushing all this up, I'm going to change this to from above. And you can see the amount of detail that is added here. I'm going to change the threshold just so that it's a little bit. We can do wrap to underlying so that it matches the shape below a bit better. I'm going to turn off the displacement again because I just want to treat this like a flattish surface. Now we've got a really strong marble with a whole lot of grain and noise in it. We can change some properties here like how rough it is. We do want this to be quite rough, so I'll keep that high. And you can play around with some frequencies. Threshold. And give it a real good gory horror type of look. Now, if you don't want this so uniform and everywhere, we can go ahead and add another mask. And here you want to add some noise, maybe a Perlin noise. And you play around with the values and you'll see that you don't get that effect everywhere now. I can go ahead and add another mask and I'll go for the same pattern, the square pattern. And I'm going to go down to the cutout and play around with that. And now you can see I can decide which tiles are being cut out or not. So some tiles do have that effect on them, some don't. I can go ahead and change the opacity of that so that we really do get variation. You can carry on adding even more layers and materials to suit you. Maybe you want some moss on top. But let's say you only want that moss in certain places. You can use the threshold, wrap to underlying, change some frequencies, and also use a mask. Again, we'll use a noise mask, permanent, and you can play around with those values till you get something that you like. It doesn't have to be everywhere. You can always toggle the settings to see what you get with and without. Same for every other layer. And you might even like to turn off the tiling completely. But there you go, there's a nice tileable texture that you could put in as a variation in your game. You can maybe paint the area that you want this effect and have other assets in place. You can also add decals. Some different scratched metals as well. And many other things. By clicking on Atlas, you're actually using a decal type effect. And bringing this in, then you can have it only affect a certain place. With that selected, we can go down to placement and we can decide where we want it. You want to make sure the scale makes sense to the scene. Something's this big, it doesn't quite look right, so I'm just going to make that a bit smaller. Because remember, this is a real world scale of about 2 meters by 2 meters. Also, some of the tones here, it's not rough enough, so I'm going to go back to this layer and go down to the roughness. I'm going to increase the value. I want this to look very dried out and worn, and having it shiny like that doesn't make much sense. Let's try it in different lights again. And shift and right mouse button to rotate. Rotate the lights. There you have it. Now if you want to export this, you go to export. You're going to export the albedo, which is the color, and you can export a gloss map. Don't need roughness, and a normal map we need. Everything else is optional. This is a typical setup for Unity: albedo, gloss, and normal. If you've got a metallic surface, it's important to export a metallic map, or in this case a specular map, but you can easily change the options. You can add a map that you want. You can choose how you channel pack each of these. You may want the ambient occlusion in the red channel because it's grayscale, the metalness in the green, and maybe the gloss inside the blue channel. But it's up to you to make a shader that reads the correct values and puts them into the correct output node inside Unity. But for now, Unity would read an RGBA. You would put your gloss into the alpha. These can just be straight values. They don't matter too much. and red for your ambient occlusion. Sorry, red is for your metalness. And you can call this metal dash gloss. Now you don't actually need the metalness map itself or the gloss map itself, because the gloss map is contained in the alpha of this channel packed texture, where red deals with the metalness, green does nothing, blue does nothing, and A deals with gloss. This is your normal map, and everything's good. You can check out how the normal map looks by looking at the normal here. As you can see, it does a pretty good job of looking like it's deviating the light, and that's what its job is. The roughness map, as you can see, the roughness for these grout lines is pretty low, which means it's going to be quite shiny. I think we should change that. I think it might be coming from this liquid layer, so I'm going to change the roughness of this to be quite high, and that's now made this a lot brighter. That's looking a bit better. So back to export, you can choose the final resolution that you want now. I recommend 4096 because it's got a lot of detail, but you can use any of these. Depending on what kind of game you're making, you might not need as much resolution as 4096, so 2048 is ideal. You have to export to a specified location. I'm just going to put it on the desktop for now. Export 3 maps. Okay, so I'm going to load up Unity 2019.4 long-term support. I just want to make a new project with that version. I'll call this project Test Mixer. It's going to be left as 3D, and all the other options are fine. We won't be doing any HD render pipeline stuff just yet. Okay, now that Unity is loaded, I'm going to import our materials and the textures that were exported from Mixer, and we're going to make up a new material and test it on a plane. So I'm just going to go to create a new folder. I'm just going to call it Mixer. Create another folder. I'll call this Tiles. And I'm going to import new asset. And have a look for the folder that it exported in. That's my mix. And I'm going to grab those 3 textures and do import. Now the normal map needs to be set as a normal map, and then apply, and the other ones are fine. If you have a look at the My Mix Metal Gloss, have a look at the different channels, you'll see that in the alpha channel there is the gloss value. The red channel is black because it's not a metallic surface, therefore the value is very low. There's nothing in the green channel and nothing in the blue channel, just their own tones there. Okay, so it's all looking good. Now you want to create a material. I'm going to call this the tiles. You're going to drag albedo into albedo and metal gloss into this metal area. And your normal map into normal map. Sometimes if you haven't set this as a normal map, it might say fix now, and all that is doing is actually setting this to a normal map for you. So if you have forgot that stage of changing it from default to normal map, when it comes up fix now, just say yes, you want to fix it now, and that will correct that for you. Okay, so there it is there. Now I'm just going to put a simple plane in the scene. And I'm going to drag the material over to it. Now this plane itself might be a little bit big or too small. A good way to compare it is to add a cube. This cube is 1 meters by 1 meter. And we know that when we created this plane, it was actually a 2 by 2 meter tile texture. So I'm just going to scale this down until the cube sits on about a quarter of that tile, because the cube being 1 meter and this plane being 2 by 2 meters, that makes one of the quadrants a meter. I guess just a little bit smaller. Okay, that's now correct. So I'll duplicate the plane, move this aside, and I'm going to change the plane to a size that I want this to be. So let's say we want it to be 2 by 2 by 2. Let's just duplicate the material. You can do Control D. I'm just going to drag this tiles one onto this one because we want to tile it until it looks like this. To tile it, let's go to tiles 1 and we change the tiling to something like 10, 10. Let's move the cube. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it's just a little bit small. I'm going to change it again. Let's try 8, 8. Just a little bit more, 9 and 9. And that's close enough. So now we know that tile is the right relative size. The only issue being this mossy texture. Now the good thing about Mixer is you can go back in if you've saved this project as your My Mix. It should remember all the layers. I'm just going to get rid of this moss patch and the moss itself. And I can actually save this out as a variation if I like. So I'll go to export and call this My Mix A and export the same 3 maps. Only difference being there's no moss in this one. Okay, with that done, we can go back into Unity and it's going to import a new asset and come out and look for My Mix A. It's created a folder with the new textures. I'm going to import those. I'm going to choose the tiles material to bring these ones in. Now this one, I'm not going to bother changing it here just to show you what I was talking about earlier. If I drag the normal map in, it says this texture is not marked as a normal map. Fix Now will change that for you. So as you can see, it's changed it to a normal map. So it's perfectly fine to do it that way. So now when I drag in the tiles material and I change the tiling to 9 and 9, the same as the other one, we now have 2 variations of roughly the same kind of material, and that can be pretty useful if you're going to paint in some different effects between the 2 of these, if you were using this perhaps in a flat terrain of some kind, or if there was a shader that you had that mixed 2 materials. And I'll talk about that in a future video. But for now, that's pretty much it. You can still play around with certain settings here. And you can still tint the tone. Let's just turn off the grid so we can see that easy. You can also add in a light source. Maybe a point light. You can see a little bit better of how the reflection works. If you really want to see more reflection, you can add a reflection probe. Change the reflection probe to real time on awake, and you see everything changes because it captures reflection data. And you can increase the intensity of that to really see it more. If you want, you can completely remove the metallic matte mask, and you can play around with the sliders themselves. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you enjoy making up some of these textures and using Mixer. And I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.